Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Turfgrass Epistemology's first evening podcast. I hope it goes well. I am here by myself. My wife is out of town, and I'm here taking care of two kids. So, and plus I'm not really doing too well. I'm kind of under the weather at the moment. So I'm hoping that we can get through this with few distractions from little feet running down the stairs to come ask me to be quiet. So thank you all for joining me. Turfgrass Epistemology. We'll see how this goes. Hopefully this is a little bit, we have a little bit different crowd or more of the same crowd, different time period. Hopefully everybody's off work and had a good day today. And we'll see how it goes. Real quick, I don't think I've ever actually bothered explaining what turfgrass epistemology is. Maybe I should do that on a video and post it as a entry video for the channel. But epistemology is the study of knowledge. This sort of sounds circular a little bit if you're unfamiliar with the term, but basically, you know, the phrase that I use is, you know, how do we know what we know about turfgrass science? And so the idea is that epistemologists, of which I am not, okay, I struggle with that daily, trying to learn more about it. But they really try to figure out, you know, what is knowledge? How do we know what we know? Do we really know anything? You know, those are deep philosophical questions. But in the world of turfgrass and this channel, what I'm really hoping to provide is, information or knowledge about how we critically review information. And one of the early episodes we did was with my wife, who's here at University of Kentucky, and she went over the hierarchy of evidence and helped us understand how we prioritize information. What information is more valuable than other information is probably an easy way to say that. So that, as we move up that pyramid of evidence, we become more confident in the information, and when we become more confident in our position on certain issues based upon where the information came from on that pyramid. So that's kind of the world of epistemology, gaining confidence and helping guide our beliefs and our convictions based upon the best available evidence. That's, in my world, how we know, in my view, how do we know what we know? What's the best way to get knowledge, or how confident can we be with the information that we get? And so that's what epistemology is. Thank you for joining me, Gray. And I apologize. I don't really know everybody's name. I'm new to this whole thing, so I apologize. I'm not even sure if you're a male or female. I'm doing my best to kind of get my feet wet in this world. But LW50, I'm not sure. I mean, I apologize. I need to get more involved with the Discord channel and more chit chatty and learn more about you people, you folks. So, but I see Brady and Gray and B Butcher and Eric and Evie does it. So thank you all for joining me. I hope you're finding the information useful and not too burdensome. I know a lot of this information is scientific and very dry, and I'm very dry. I have never been accused of being entertaining, that's for sure. So, I know it's sometimes challenging to understand this information, but really, sincerely, what I want to try to provide is just a layman's explanation as to what happened, and it's not me doing it, right? I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't do this. Occasionally I opine, yes, but it's really the author's work, So, and even the authors aren't saying to do this; they're just explaining what they found. They're showing what they did and explaining what they found, and they hopefully provide some practical recommendations or information at the end for people to apply the information. But that's basically in a nutshell kind of what I'm hoping to accomplish and why I'm here. So if you have any questions or any papers or topics you would like for me to delve into, please let me know. I'll just say this from the beginning. I know almost nothing about plant pathology, about weed biology, about nematology. I am completely ignorant when it comes to those things. My world is nutrition and soils and fertility and those things. So I'll do what I can in those areas, but really it would be someone explaining a paper and as best I can. But I really wouldn't have the insight or the knowledge to really provide a lot of critical review or content of the paper. I would just be able to help decipher it or explain it in a layman's terms. So anyway, so this is the fall. Let's get into the paper. So this is the fall. We're last several episodes we've been talking about fertility, talking about what to do during establishment, what people have been finding. So we have 2 or 3 more papers. I keep saying we have 1 more paper, and then I find 2 or 3 more that I want to go over. But we have 2 or 3 more papers that I want to make sure we cover. Today we're going to go over today, and then we have one on fall fertility of warm season grasses. We have another one on cool season grasses, and then we have a third one on phosphorus requirements of cool season grasses during establishment as well. So all that will be gone over, I guess, tomorrow and then next week. So we're still on the fall fertility, establishment fertility topic. I think it's that time of year people are looking for information or making changes to their program. So we're still doing that. Okay, this is the paper we're talking about today, guys and gals. Nitrogen fertilizer and clover inclusion effects on establishment of fine fescue taxa. Now, I've been going over the abstract, and I've been going over where to go find these papers. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing that. I'm just going to tell you, you can Google this, Google Scholar this. You can Turfgrass information file it. You can search on Turfgrass information file and find it. You can go to your library and search on the library's computers there and find this article. But if you're looking for, does clover help, cool season grass establishment or whatever, you can just Google that. And eventually you're going to come across several papers, but this is one of them. This is published in 2022 in Crop Science. Okay. So I'm actually going to skip the abstract too today. I'm going to get into this because I want to talk. This particular paper talks about a couple different species, but it also talks about fertility, and that's what I'm interested in, is the fertility component. And when I highlighted what I want to talk about, dang near the whole manuscript was highlighted, so I want to get to this, so I don't spend 3 hours talking about one paper. Okay. All right. So the introduction, as you all know, they're going to set the stage. Why is this? Why are we doing this? What's the problem? What are we observing? And then they're going to provide the hypothesis at the end of the introduction. So a couple of things I've highlighted is, just real quick, the authors, well, I can't name all the authors, but it's by Ross Braun, who's now at, I just emailed him earlier. He's Kansas State, I guess. He was at Purdue, I think, and now he's at Kansas State. Anyway, Braun et al. Are the authors. Dr. Patton and Dr. Watkins are on here, and I don't mean to leave anybody out, but there's like 6 authors. Okay. A couple of highlights in the introduction. Okay, 5 fine fescue taxas, 5 fine fescue taxa used in turfgrass systems are collectively known as grouping fine fescues, and talk all about it. It goes and talks about the different low input fescues and so forth. And it says, okay, in addition, fine fescues can maintain acceptable turfgrass quality and better resist summer annual grassy and perennial broadleaf weed invasion than other types of turfgrass species, such as tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass, when maintained at low to moderate annual N fertilization levels. Now, at 1 and 2 pounds of nitrogen. Remember, 49 is 1 pound, so 49 and 98 are 1 and 2 pounds of nitrogen per thousand. So I want to make sure we're clear before we go too much further. When they say things like this, when the author says, fine fescue can be maintained acceptable turfgrass quality and it can better resist whatever compared to this, and then they cite those citations, the authors aren't saying that's the case in every situation. They're saying that's the case in the situations cited by those authors. And the reason I say that is because what he's saying here, what Ross is saying in this paper, in the introduction, about better resist annual grassy and perennial broadleaf weeds invasion and other turf and so forth, is true from the authors that wrote those papers. But in Kentucky, here in Lexington, we found that fine fescues, over the research that we've been doing here, or have done here, it's closed now, but that the fine fescues struggle here in Lexington, primarily due to the heat. Okay, so as compared to tall fescues. Okay, so tall fescues tend to be a more suitable turfgrass here in Lexington than the fine fescues. Okay, or even bluegrass. So just be mindful when you're reading this that it's not, I don't think Ross is intending to say this is the case in all situations. I'm sure that's not what he's saying. He's simply making a case that fine fescues are suitable and more suitable than these other grasses based upon what these authors have found in the past. But don't take that as, okay, Braun and who did he quote here? Sean Askew and 2 or 3 other authors here all said that fine fescues are better, so I'm going to go out and plant fine fescues in southern Tennessee. Okay, you're not going to be happy with that probably. Okay, so you you have to take the information from within the context that it was provided, and in the context that it was provided in this case, it was very likely colder climates, like up in Indiana or in wherever they did those studies at Wisconsin or whatever. Okay, so be mindful of that. Okay, he goes through and continues to explain some fine fescue information. It says additional research would allow for better understanding of BMPs for fine fescues to overcome an intermediate establishment vigor, which is important because it can influence the plant's competitiveness with weeds, thus reducing the need for herbicide inputs. So what he's saying here is that the value of hastening the establishment time is critical or important, according to him, according to Harper, Ross, and Harper here, and apparently according to Ross, who wrote the paper. It's important because it can increase the plant's likelihood of competition for space with weeds and reduce the amount of herbicides you have to apply later on. So you've heard me say before on previous podcasts is that I'm not particularly concerned about hastening establishment. I don't really care about that. The average turfgrass manager probably would. The average homeowner, I don't know. Maybe they would, maybe they won't. I don't. But he's saying that if you do this, you're likely to result in these benefits. Okay. One well-known way to enhance establishment vigor is providing nitrogen and phosphorus fertilization at seeding and during establishment. Now, I do not take that sentence as very solid or sound. And the reason I say that is there is clearly evidence where that's the case. There is also clearly evidence where that's not the case. Okay. So when you say it says well-known way to enhance establishment is to apply phosphorus. There's literature that clearly shows that, but there's also, I would say, probably equal or greater literature that says applying phosphorus is not useful in terms of hastening establishment, especially on soils that contain high phosphorus. Okay. So be careful when you're reading this. Don't take that as, literal. It is true. Phosphorus helps in some situations, but not always. It says Chang reported the germination and establishment of strong creeping red fescue showed minimal to no response to the application of phosphorus or increasing phosphorus levels, unlike Kentucky bluegrass or creeping red. We're going to review this Chang paper next week. He found phosphorus did show a response. So I guess that's the spoiler alert, because the paper is, do you need to apply phosphorus basically? And he found that he did need to, but it was on low phosphorus soils. It was, I don't remember that paper, but it's something like, I think he used the Olsen extractant, and it was, I think 10 or 12 parts per million phosphorus using the Olsen. So it was low in phosphorus, and he found a response for applying phosphorus, and Chang did. We'll review that paper next week. Braun et al. Reported application of nitrogen at 3/4 pound of N and 1/2 pound of P from a starter fertilizer had minimal effect on the rate establishment for a fine fescue mixture. So here's the same author, Ross, did another paper, another research, and he found that there really wasn't a benefit to applying a establishment fertilizer or pre-plant fertilizer or whatever you want to call it. Okay. So he's, again, just going through the literature, explaining the case, explaining the situation. I'm going to get through the introduction, and I'll start answering the questions that are in the chat. Just one second, guys. Inclusion of okay, so this is all, so nitrogen. And so the question is, how much nitrogen do we need to apply? Do we need to apply phosphorus? But also there is this concept in agriculture of growing clover at the time where your crops are not growing, fixing some nitrogen, and then planting a crop the next season into the clover mixture. The idea being that the clover would fix the nitrogen and provide some nitrogen to your crop. And so the possibility exists in turfgrass to do something similar, to include a clover that would fix the nitrogen out of the air without applying fertilizer and provide some nitrogen that way. So he provides a little bit of background. Inclusion of a nitrogen-fixing legume species at establishment could be a potential alternative to in-fertilization. However, few experiments have examined the influence of cover crops on turfgrass establishment, including a low-growing legume such as white clover would also support the growing interest in flowering bee lawn turf mixture. So he's building a case to pursue a research question: should we include clovers? It's possible it's biologically plausible that it could provide some nitrogen, and it also provides a environment for honeybees or for bees to flourish as well. So there's a case to be made to pursue this as a research objective, the inclusion of clover. Therefore, our objective was to investigate differences among fine fescue taxa and determine optimal nitrogen fertility or clover inclusion programs for fine fescue taxa during establishment for future low input sites. Okay, so if you're not aware by now, there is a great deal of revenue and research funding spent on development of genetics in turfgrass, so better genetics in our turfgrass species. And a large amount of that interest is designed around low input. So if you're familiar with NTEP, National Turfgrass Evaluation Program, they fund a lot of these studies. Also, there's a association called A-List, the Low Input Sustainable Turfgrass Association, or Low Input Sustainable Turfgrass, I believe is what it stands for. And they're looking at not just what's the prettiest grass in the block. They're looking to see which of these grasses is acceptable or higher quality given low water, low fertility, low herbicides, and increased heat or whatever. They're looking to see which ones of those they can promote to reduce the amount of input required to maintain our lawns. And really, you hear this occasionally, but I think it's true, is that the amount of trials that we do around the United States, particularly say NTEP and A-List, we'll do 20, 30, 40, 50 different turfgrass cultivars and species all in one study sometimes. And only a handful actually make it to the top. And the other ones don't usually make it to market, or they do and they're not at the top of the list. So let's just say hypothetically that the ones at the bottom get thrown away. Those ones that get thrown away are vastly superior to probably what you have in your lawn now if you have a lawn that's more than, say, 15 or 20 years old. So the reason I'm saying that is imagine how good the grasses are that make it to the top of that list and make it in the bags from your seed blenders, okay? Genetics is immensely important in today's ecosystems in our urban lawns. If you're dealing with, God forbid, Kentucky 31, which is not supposed to be in Kentucky lawns, get it out. Don't buy it. It's not what we recommend in Kentucky. But if you're dealing with any of the older tall fescues, I'm not saying go rip it out and kill it and replace it. I'm not saying that. But if you are in a situation where you are considering doing that and you're like, hey, I'm going to replace my lawn, the newer varieties, the newer cultivars are greatly superior in terms of water, in terms of water use, in terms of nutrient use, pesticide use, disease tolerance, and all these things. They're much, much better. So genetics plays a huge role. And he's going to look at that a little bit in this study. Okay, so let's talk about the locations and the site details where they did these studies. They conducted them in Indiana, Oregon, and in Minnesota. The Indiana soil pH was 6.7, Oregon was 6.3, and Minnesota was 5.7. Let's talk about the phosphorus here. The phosphorus in Indiana was 58 and 63. And that was Bray-1 extractable phosphorus. And in Oregon, it was 64. It looks like Oregon was Bray-1 as well. I guess they did it all Bray-1. I thought Oregon did maybe like 3 up in Oregon, but apparently all the phosphorus was Bray-1. So it's 58, 63, and Oregon was 64, and Minnesota was 120. So all of these Bray P phosphorus levels were certainly adequate. Is the setting. So we're in Indiana, we're in Oregon, we're in Minnesota, and the phosphorus levels in the soil were suitable or acceptable levels. Okay, let me back up here and let's start reading the chat. I'm losing track of the chat. I'm only one man, so give me a second here. Oh yeah, I'll talk. Yeah. Rutgers has some good. My thought is half pound in per 1,000 feet before we get further. So, oh yeah, Evie. So the comment in the chat is same can be said for the newer fine fescues. So many people are used to 20, 30-year-old fine fescues that are so much worse than the newer cultivars today. I don't know if that can really be stated strongly enough, really. You know, we're in the world and we're in turf, and you're here listening to this because you're in turf, and we're familiar with these things, but the average homeowner isn't. And so when the average homeowner, you try to explain to them, yeah, this turfgrass variety is something you probably don't want to use, or this one is something you do want to use, they may not really understand the gravity of that comment. I mean, the analogy is sort of lame and whatever, but it's really like driving an old clunker car for the last 30 years and it's worn out, and you just want to keep putting air in those tires. You want to keep changing the spark plugs, and you're putting more money into it, keeping it running, than you would if you just let it go and got a new car of the newer variety, the more efficient vehicle. So at some point, you're putting so much into it, so much water or moisture or whatever, or nutrients or whatever, that it's just no longer economically viable. And it's time to go ahead and let that grass move on and get a new cultivar. It's not the same grass you had, I can assure you. And for the most part, and I'm probably going to be wrong on this, but for the most part, when I've looked at the big box, I don't ever buy anything from the big box stores. I end up going to seed blenders, like from the seed companies themselves, and I buy it just like you buy it. Okay, I don't get it for free. I buy it in a bag and they ship it to me, because I know the varieties in there are 100% turf type tall fescue or 100%, fine fescues or whatever. It's not blended with stuff in there like perennial rye that's just there for the homeowner to see it germinate in 3 days and turn green and then die in 6 months. I know what I'm getting is what I want. But when you go to the big box stores and you look at the varieties of the turfs I do want, like say turf type tall fescue, the varieties in there are good varieties. I mean, there may not be the top tier varieties that you get from some of the other seed companies, but they're still much, much better than what you have in your lawn, more than likely. So just be aware of that. The genetics, I wouldn't have said this 20 years ago so much, because there were some improvements. I mean, Tiff Eagle and obviously the 419s of the world, they've been out for a long, long time. But there has been a great deal of movement in that area of our science in terms of genetics and turf grasses, and it makes a huge difference. So don't underestimate that, okay? Yeah, so LW50. So at what point do the input economics give way to a renovation? And that's a succinct way of saying what I said, yeah. So at some point you got to realize I'm spending way too much time and effort trying to keep this grass alive. It's, but they may not realize that a newer turf would solve that problem. They may think, oh, I'm just going to put another turf in here, I'm going to have the same problem. Well, you might, but it probably might not. I mean, it's a different turf, better genetics. All right, let's keep going through here. So nitrogen fertilization and cover crop program treatment level in this experiment. So I'm going to go through this because the nutrient component of this is what I'm interested in. No, there's the other component is the turf grasses, but so the nutrient treatments basically. So one, they had a non-treated, which is right here. So non-treated was one of their treatments. They had 24.5 kilograms, which is a half a pound of N at seeding. They had 1 pound of N at seeding. Then they had a pound, I guess that's a pound and a half, pound and 3/4, whatever that is. But they had a pound at seeding, so a half a pound at seeding, and then a pound at 4 weeks after. So they did a half a pound when they seeded it, and they put a pound down a month later. Then they did a pound at seeding and 1 pound a month later. And then the next one, they did a pound at seeding and then a pound a month later, and then a half a pound a month after that. So this is actually, I would like to talk to Ross about this, because this is actually reverse of what I did on my master's, where on my master's we did a low rate and then we slowly increased it. And here they're doing, well, they did that on this treatment. They did a low rate and then they slowly increased. But the next one's like a full rate and then a full rate and then a full rate and a half rate. But the concept is still there, a progressive sort of application program of like adding more nitrogen as the turf continues to develop. So those are the nitrogen application treatments. Then they did an annual clover cover with no nitrogen, and the clover was a frosty berseem clover. I can't even pronounce that. Yeah. And then they did that was an annual clover they planted. And then they did another plot with a perennial clover treatment. Those are the two treatments that they were trying to do to see if the inclusion of a legume would offset some of the nitrogen or provide some nitrogen, at least suitable for grow in. They didn't apply any mineral or synthetic fertilizer to that. Okay. So those are the treatments. The form of nitrogen was, quick release urea. Okay, so it was quick release nitrogen for urea, at seeding. And then they use slow release urea at if they applied it 1 month after, they did a slow release urea. It was a polymer coated urea after that. Okay. So the experimental site design and management, field experiments were repeated across 2 years at 2 locations, Indiana and Oregon, and 1 year at a third location, Minnesota. Okay. So the Minnesota site only had 1 year. So that's a pretty strong study, though. I mean, 2 years at 2 locations is not common, but that's robust for sure. I mean, what we require is 2 years in a location to get published in these top journals, and he did 2 years in 2 locations plus 1 year in the third location. So that's very good. Providing 5 replications across time and location. These experiments were initiated in all 3 locations in autumn of 2019. So this was just finished a year or 2 ago, and it's already published. So good job for Ross and the other authors getting this out. They did it in locations that represent cool season or northern transition climatic zones. So that's where we're at. So this is why we're in the fine fescue world. And that's why he's talking about fine fescues tend to be a little bit better than tall fescues in some instances, because they're in the cool season world. They're not in the transition world like I am here in Lexington, where we see tall fescue generally be more acceptable. The species, so the species main effect included 4 fine fescue taxa, and he goes through the fine fescues that he used. So this is the main effect, was the 4 different fine fescues. And then the fertility and cover crop program main effect included, I'm sorry, I still got a cough for like the last week. I don't know when I'm going to get rid of this cough. It included 8 nitrogen fertility or cover crop treatments, which I just went over. 6, I'm not going to go over it again. I just explained the fertility program. Prior to seeding, the soil was tilled at each site, and a starter fertilizer of triple superphosphate was applied at a rate of 22 kilograms, so half a pound of P across the entire study. And I just highlighted this, and it is what it is. This is common on all these studies. But when you're dealing with a soil, a research site that has more than adequate phosphorus right here, everything's at 60 or greater. I don't know if it's in our best interest as scientists to do this just to cover our basis from the scientific perspective. In other words, sometimes we'll do things just to ensure that it wasn't deficient and it wouldn't alter the results. But then when we do it, someone can come in and read this like, well, they did it in their study and they had plenty of phosphorus in their soil and they still applied phosphorus. Why can't I do it? So I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think you could easily get it published just by simply saying that the soil phosphorus was found to be at adequate levels, therefore no starter fertilizer was applied, and you'd still see the same results. But I mean, I get it. You're going to go to this much trouble. You don't want some weird outlier to screw up your study. So you're going to go ahead and apply it anyway, just to make sure it's not deficient. I understand that, but I just don't know how I feel about that. Okay. Data collected. Let's get to the data collected. Fine fescue establishment rate was calculated from digital images using GraphPad. I've talked about that before. I love GraphPad. Grid counts for percentages of fine fescue cover were collected after winter. Okay. On these dates, estimates of fine fescue turf were taken using a modification of the vertical point quadratic method. So basically, well, I'm not going to cut through all this and just explain what they did. So what you do is you take a grid that has the little lines in it that you probably made by yourself using a PVC pipe or whatever and some string. And every time you put that, you just randomly put that on the plot. And every time and it comes up with so many intersects. And this one had 100. So he mentions it right here. This one has 100 intersects. So the lines cross each other 100 times on that grid. And wherever they cross, if at that location, if at that intersection, in this case, he's counting fine fescue was present under each intersection. So if fine fescue was under one of those intersections, it was counted as as yes. And then you can come up with a percentage of the grid that had fine fescue. That's how they did it. Okay. So if 80% of the intersects had fine fescue under it, then it was 80% established as the way. Oh wait, 80%. Yeah, it was 80. They're doing the established. Yeah, they were. Yeah, so they were doing percentage of fine fescue cover. Okay, that's what they're doing with the intersect method. That's how we do it. That's a rather tedious way of doing it. There's other ways of doing it, but it's very accurate, I guess. So additional data included visual fine fescue cover, 0 to 100% just by visually looking at it. Visual winter annual weed and annual bluegrass cover, 0 to 100%. And then visual turfgrass quality, we've talked about before. They did 6 as minimum, which is standard nowadays. And that's it for that. So they did quality and cover. It's basically a short way of saying that. Okay. So let's get to table 3, get into the results here. So just to set the stage, we have 3 locations. We're applying different rates of nitrogen, and we have clover or not clover, and we have several different. We have 4 or 5. We have 1, 2, 3. We have 4 different fine fescue cultivars, and so they're trying to figure out at what nitrogen rate would an acceptable establishment be, and then this was days until 90% establishment is what they deemed to be the metric they're using. At what nitrogen rate would result in that, and also would the inclusion of clover have an impact or a benefit in any ways? That's what we want to know. So at the end of this study, we hope to find you need to apply this much nitrogen. If you apply this much more nitrogen, you either will or will not see a better response. And that's what we're going to find out right now. Okay, so days until establishment. We see, in this case, we want the lower numbers or better. Okay, so zero nitrogen resulted in 55 days. So say 55 days to 90% establishment. When you added a half a pound, that 55 dropped to 43, and it was statistically significant. I would say that's clearly biologically significant as well. Okay, that's almost 2 weeks, 10 to 12 days, whatever it is. When you add a pound in, so you will from a half a pound to a pound, you do see a statistical reduction in the time it takes to establish from 43 to 39, 40. Okay, that's 3 days. I don't know if that's biologically significant, but I'll say, let's just go with it and say, yes, it is. It's statistical, and let's just say it's biological. You gain another 3 days of establishment by applying a pound. But greater than this pound, you go from 1 pound to a pound and a half to 2 pounds to 4. That's 2.5 pounds, whatever total that is. I can't do this all in my head quick enough. You don't see any difference between those higher rates and the 1 pound rate. Okay. So what this is saying is you can apply 1 pound in at establishment, and you're going to get the highest rate of establishment that you would achieve, even if you applied up to 2 or 2.5 pounds of in, whatever this rate is, 122, or so let's say 2.5 pounds in. You're going to get the same establishment rate. So this table alone, let me do that math so I'm not getting the wrong number. Yeah, 2.5 pounds in. If you just looked at this table alone, you can walk away under similar conditions and feel confident that if you're out there in your business and you're applying 2 pounds in an establishment because you're trying to get your yards grown in quicker, this is showing with these fine fescues and under the conditions of these studies, and this says data was combined across 5 experimental runs, okay, that you don't need to apply 2 pounds in. You don't need to apply 2.5 pounds in. You don't need to apply 1.5 pounds in. You can just apply 1 pound. You can really probably apply 0.5 pound. And whatever establishment you're going to get in terms of increasing the rate relative to not applying anything, you're going to get it from that 1 pound. You're not going to get any more appreciable increase at all from applying more and more nitrogen under conditions similar to this study with these turfgrass species that they investigated, okay? That's sort of the take-home message from Table 3. It's critical to understand that. 0.5 pound's probably good enough. 1 pound might get you a little bit more, but no more than that, okay? So whether I've talked to you about it before, whether you're a tree-hugging hippie or whether you're a capitalist businessman, it's the same message to both of you. It's going to save you money by applying less. And if you don't care about the money and you care about nature and all these other things, that's great. It's going to reduce the risk by applying less nitrogen. So save yourself some money, reduce the risk of environmental impairment, apply less nitrogen, no more than 1 pound in this case, probably 0.5 pound is what I would do, and you're fine, okay? Now, when they didn't apply any nitrogen, and they just did the clover, okay, the annual clover didn't do anything relative to nothing. So it's the same as applying no nitrogen. Now, the perennial clover did reduce establishment by about 5 days, 6 days, something like that. There was a little bit of benefit to using the perennial clover, okay? But it was not better than applying 0.5 pound in. You can see this number right here, 49 is a B, and this one here is 43.1 is a C. So 0.5 pound in still doing a better job than the clover, but the perennial clover did provide some benefit relative to doing nothing. Okay? Let's continue. I got a whole bunch highlighted, and I got to get through this. I just explained this whole thing right here. I just got through explaining, so I'm not going to go over it again. The overall, okay, yeah, so I just explained this. So during the first 8 weeks, 24.5 was what you wanted to do. After planning increased establishment, and in levels higher than 49 provided negligible benefits. That's what I just explained. Let's see, where was I going to go with this? Yeah, so there's less... what they're saying here, based on our scatter plots, the standard error of the... Okay, let me explain what they're doing. There is less variability in the treatment means. So let me see if I can explain this. Let me just read it and then I'll explain it. Okay, so furthermore, figure 1B, which is this one right down here, this figure right... Oh, I can't highlight it. This figure right here. Figure 1B displays the effects of 6 fertility treatments, not including the clover treatments, on percentage of green vegetation cover as time advances from 28 to 42 or 70 days after planting. Based on scatter plots, the standard error of the mean, there is less variability in the treatment means when increasing infertility above 0.5 pound in. So, which may provide greater probability of a successful establishment of fine fescues when planted at low input sites. So what they're... So so what they're saying here is, you know what? Let me just skip through that. Basically, what he's saying is that there's less variability, and there's a greater probability of establishment based upon the amount of nitrogen that you applied. I don't know why I highlighted that. I'm sorry. Let me skip to the next one. When a quick release fertilizer was utilized at seeding, followed by a slow release fertilizer for all additional in-fertilizer applications at 4 and 8 weeks, then results demonstrate that applying greater than 1 pound in during the first 8 weeks provided negligible establishment benefits with fine. So that's what I mentioned. So you can apply 1 pound, and then you can apply slow release after that, and you can apply a little bit more after that, and it doesn't really do you any benefit. An enhanced infertility effect may have been observed if a quick release N fertilizer was utilized at all application timing instead of a slow release fertilizer. However, further research, so what they're saying is because they applied a slow release after the quick release, it might have been too slow to start releasing and provide its value or provide the turf with nitrogen because it was slow. Kind of takes time to get started. Usually anywhere from like 7 to 14 days, depending on the fertilizer. It takes to kind of get that nitrogen to release. And they're saying if they just use quick, maybe there would be a benefit, but they didn't do that. They don't know, so you have to do research to figure that out. But I'm not a huge fan of doing slow release, and during establishment, I'll tell you why. It's not that it won't work. Slow release nitrogen definitely will work during establishment, but and I've done this I don't know how many times. You have to know what slow release nitrogen source you're using, and you have to know how that nitrogen source releases given your location. Okay, so if you go out with 2 pounds of nitrogen from a 4000 polymer coat, you are not going to be happy with that. Okay, but if you go out with 2 pounds of nitrogen from a 44.5, you will probably be happy with that. So the reason I don't really recommend it too much is because there's not a lot of people who really understand it to that level. I don't mean to speak down, but it's just like even many turf managers really don't give it that much thought. They'll just go out and throw out whatever they have or slow release, and if they don't get the rate right, then the customer is not going to be happy. It's not going to grow in at the rate they're looking for, or it's going to grow in. It's going to exhaust it. There's just too many variables. Whereas with a soluble, one, it's much less expensive, but two, I know when I put that out, it's going to be available pretty quick. And I also know I'm probably going to come back in 2 or 3 weeks and put out a little bit more anyway. So if you know what you're doing with slow release materials, and you know how it releases, you know the rate of release, you know the coating thickness, or if it's a reactive nitrogen, you know exactly what's going on, the temperatures and all these things, and you're comfortable and you know that you need to apply 1 pound or 2 pounds or 3 pounds in with this product at this time on this grass, at this location, then it will work, and it will work very well. But if you don't know what you're doing, it's you might have egg on your face before you know it. So be careful, okay, guys and gals. Okay, considering all the sites had high soil organic matter, the results from this study may not necessarily translate to sites with poor soils lacking organic matter. At sites with poor soils, one additional nitrogen greater than 1 pound during the first 8 weeks of planting could prove beneficial. So what he's doing here, and I wish I had Ross on here, I would ask him. I think he's leaving himself an open door. That's what that is. So I don't mean, maybe he's not. Maybe I'm reading too much into that. But basically what he's saying is that we only needed 1 pound, but we had organic matter in our soils. And so if you don't have organic matter in soils, you might need to apply more than 1 pound. So if some, politician comes by and starts writing laws based upon this article, he's going to say, well, this article said you only need 1 pound, so I'm not going to let any more than 1 pound go on an establishment. But writing something like this in an article kind of gives you an open door and say, well, I said 1 pound, but our site had organic matter. So if you don't have organic matter, you need to allow for more nitrogen potentially. There's nothing really wrong with that, but I'm a little bit cynical when I see these things. I'm like, I think that's probably what was going on in Ross's mind. But I don't want to speak for him. I actually wanted to have him on tonight, but he wasn't able to make it. So maybe I can get him on in a future time and we can talk about it more. Okay, let's continue. Inclusion of clover as a cover or companion crop with fine fescues decreased the rate of establishment compared with applying a pound. I'm sorry, applying with greater than or equal than a pound, which is indicated by the greater number of establishment days until 90% and smaller hill slope values in table 3. Okay. So actually including the clover reduced it. Where does that in table 3? Did I miss that? Decrease the rate of establishment compared with volume. Okay. Yeah. Which is indicate. Okay. So with a similar establishment rate, while a similar establishment rate was observed between the annual clover crop and the non-treated 0 fine fescue plots, perennial clover included with fine fescues provided slightly. Okay, I already talked about that. So perennial clovers provided some benefit. Okay. The annual clovers did not, compared to doing nothing. Incorporating legumes, white clover or other clovers in turf and other crops provides the ability to utilize atmospheric nitrogen and improve soil nitrogen levels and reduce the dependency on supplemental and fertilization. They just that's the point of them using it. It's like, if we can use clover instead of buying fertilizer, then why not? And now, if the plant's going to still use the same type of nitrogen, the nitrogen from the clover is still going to mineralize and still be in the soil for the plant to take up. So it's not like you're, providing some sort of, that natural organic and all the world's going to be great because we're using clover. That's not necessarily the case. But if it will provide greater establishment or greater turf, and I don't have to buy the fertilizer, then that's a win. I don't have to spend money on it. That's a win. But they didn't really see a great deal of benefit. They saw some marginal benefits using the perennial clover, but not from the annual clover compared to doing nothing. So here's the hypothesis. Our hypothesis was that 2 treatments containing clover would benefit the fine fescue turf by fixation and transfer of nitrogen from the legume to the turf during establishment. However, days until 90% establishment in the hill slope values indicate the 2 clover inclusion treatments had similar or only slightly better establishment rates than non-fertilized plots. Okay. Furthermore, the 2 clover inclusion treatments did not hasten establishment when compared with fertility treatments of greater than or equal to a half a pound of N. Okay, so what they're basically saying is the clover didn't do much. There's not much benefit to including clover under these conditions if you're looking to hasten establishment. Okay, there really wasn't much. Now, you could make an argument, well, what if you applied it for 10, 20 years, you had the clover there for 2 decades or whatever. Well, that's different. I mean, clearly, if you just had an open field and it was all clover and you built a house on it and you wanted to establish turf and you just killed the clover and it's been there for 10, 20, 30 years, constantly building up nitrogen, then that might be a different situation and there may be some benefit there. But in these conditions where they went in and they planted these things, they didn't show a benefit at all. So maybe it's a time thing. Maybe didn't have time to build it up. Who knows what? But there wasn't a benefit that they were able to measure. Doesn't the clover have to die before the N is released? I've never heard of that, Gray. That was a question in chat. I don't know. I'm not a clover expert. I'm not a legume expert. Maybe Gray. I don't know. So maybe someone can look that up while I'm here and put it in chat if you can find a source for that. Does the legume have to die in order for the nitrogen to become available, or can the clover still be living? I don't know. I wish I did. So LW50 had the same question. It may be true. Yeah, the more, keep in mind, guys, I'm doing this live, and the more live videos I do, the quicker you will realize that I know very, very little about anything other than my little bitty lane of turfgrass. So I I try to stay in my lane, right? I have this conversation with another colleague of mine. I was like, every time I step one, I'm in my lane. Somebody asks me, oh, what about potassium and disease resistant? And so I go, I want to get out of my lane a little bit because it's diseases, but it's potassium. And every time I stick a foot outside my lane, I get ran over. And I was like, I should just stay in your lane, And so that's what I tend to do. I'm not well versed in all these aspects, and so you'll learn that real quick. So I wish it was not the case, I guess. But okay, let's continue. So the final cover. So they also did annual bluegrass invasion because, I'll just explain. He explains right here. Annual bluegrass invasion is one of the problematic weed pests of fine fescues. Okay, the faster establishment of the 3 Festucaruba taxa compared with hard fescue resulted in similar annual bluegrass cover of less than 5%. Among the 3 subspecies in less annual bluegrass invasion than hard fescue at both rating dates. So what they're saying is that we don't really want annual bluegrass. Okay, that's generally considered a weed, and so the quicker you grow it in, the thought is the less annual bluegrass invasion that you're going to have. And so they're saying that there was differences among the turfgrass cultivars and species on how much annual bluegrass actually was able to get established during the grow in. So there were differences, albeit minor, in annual bluegrass cover among fertility and cover crop program treatments at both rating dates. So So the annual bluegrass, so over here on the right, I'm looking at table 4. On the right, we have the percent cover of annual bluegrass. And you'll see that the hard fescues here, the hard fescue had 11.8% cover of annual bluegrass, whereas the chewing fescue, the slender creeping red fescue, and the strong creeping red fescue had less annual bluegrass. So I'm inferring from what he said here is that this would be seen as a benefit of using the red fescues and the chewing fescue because they had less annual bluegrass infestation after establishment. Okay. So this is these are grid counts. So percent cover. I thought there was a quality rating. Oh. Okay, I thought there was. Okay, so there's a May grid count fine fescue turf cover and the June grid count turf cover. I could have sworn there was something else in here, but I don't see it now. Okay, anyway. So basically what this is saying, the fertility and cover crop program, here's the fertility treatments, 0 all the way up to 122 kilograms of nitrogen. And you see that in May, the grid count fine fescue turf cover is all the same from 76 to 79. They're all statistically the same. And they are the same as the annual clover resulted in the same cover, but the perennial resulted in less cover. So obviously we want to have this 100%, the higher number in this case would be better. And this is showing, again, further evidence that the higher rates of nitrogen aren't particularly better. And you go to June, that was in May, you go to June and you see the same thing essentially, is that the 0 and the 24 and 49, these are all the same. They all have B's, and then the annual bluegrass had an A here. So again, the higher and higher nitrogen rates aren't resulting in a benefit to you. We're coming down to the end here, guys. I'm going to get this done in less than a minute. Oh, let me read anytime you want to put compliments in the chat, feel free. It helps feed my vanity. Okay. So the comment is, you're good, Doc. Some of us need a tour guide for research. So, okay. All right. Well, I appreciate the compliment. Okay, so as mentioned, there was only a slight increase in rapidity of establishment once fertility levels increased above half a pound N. And there were no differences in speed of establishment between treatments from 1 pound N all the way up to 2.5 pounds N. So it says, therefore, increasing infertility above 1 pound N during establishment in fine fescues during autumn may likely start to become more detrimental than beneficial, especially with higher infertility. At which point we observed no beneficial increase in establishment rate during the autumn, but higher annual bluegrass invasion the following summer. Okay. Final turf coverage 8 and 9 months after planting. What's MAP? I guess that's months after planting. Let me make sure I'm right here. Where's the acronym chart? Usually they have an acronym chart at the top. I don't see it. I'm sure that's month after planting. Was similar among infertility treatments, not considering clover treatments, which demonstrated that gains in initial establishment when the first 56 days after planting were short-lived. So this is kind of what, I know why I highlighted this, because this last sentence here is saying that 8 and 9 months after planting, all the fertility treatments resulted in the same establishment, the same cover. And that's one reason why I don't get, me personally, I'm not talking about me as a scientist, but me as a homeowner, I could care less about how rapidly it grows in. Unless I'm late, unless I'm trying to get it seeded in October or something, and I'm trying to get it grown in before it freezes or something. I don't know why I would do that, but I don't particularly care about the rate it grows in, okay? To me, it's not a race, okay? And we're just trying to result in an acceptable quality turfgrass stand or acceptable quality lawn or whatever. And I know, you can gain a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever at the beginning by putting all these resources into it and all this extra stuff. But at the end of the day, in this case, 8 months after, it's all going to be the same anyway. So, yeah, you can hasten it and you can reduce the pesticide inputs. Maybe you can reduce some of the weed infestations. Maybe, sure. You know, I'm not saying you can't. There's not a benefit to it. There's a benefit to it. But to me, I don't value that benefit near as much as I value my money. I'd rather save my money, you know, do the least I need to do to put in to get the grass to grow in, and it's going to grow in just fine at some point. Maybe it's 2 or 3 weeks later than your lawn, maybe whatever, but then in a couple months it's going to be the same anyway, and that's exactly what he's saying here. So, you know, I've mentioned this before, is that I think I'm glad when I see scientists take a step back and actually put practical information like this in here. He didn't have to write that, you know. He could have published this without writing that sentence, but he just says, you know, 8 months afterwards, they were all the same. So, you know, any benefit during the establishment was short lived. So, you know, to me, it's like, well, why do it? You know, anyway. Okay. Establishment rate of all, this is in the conclusions. We're coming down to the end. And you can see I highlighted dang near the whole conclusion thing, because this is good information. You know, I don't want to skip over. I find it all fascinating, but I'm trying just to highlight the key points. But some of this is just too good. Establishment rate of all 4 fine fescue taxa improves with the application of a ½ pound to 1 pound of N during the first 8 weeks after planting. And N levels higher than 1 pound, during the first 2 months after planting provides negligible benefits in establishment rate and final turf cover, and may likely increase invasion of annual bluegrass when seeding during autumn. So I'm sorry, I skipped past that. The annual bluegrass is right here. So the annual bluegrass ratings, as you can see in this column here, when you have 0 nitrogen, it's 3.3. When you go up to 122, you're dealing with 8% of the plot infested with annual bluegrass. So this would be the detrimental effect he's talking about. I'm sorry I skipped over that. I had it highlighted, but I missed it. So the more and more nitrogen you put into it, the more likely you're going to have infestation of an undesirable plant. In this case, it's annual bluegrass. Okay? So you can cut that 8% almost in half to 4.5% by simply applying the ½ pound in, which that may not be priority for you, but that's what he's saying. You can, more and more you put in, you're not gaining much, and in fact, you're increasing the opportunity for weeds to come in and thrive. In summary, these results combined with the recent literature by Braun, who I'm just going to move on. Oh, there's a typo there. I didn't see that until just now. There's a parentheses here. There's a typo. Anyway, the recent literature by Braun et al. Can provide best management practices for fine fescue establishment as follows. So here we go. So this is important. So these are the best management practices according to a little bit of literature review. I'm not sure what's in the conclusions, but whatever. When seeded in autumn, the rate of establishment of strong creeping red fescue and chewing fescues is similar to tall fescue and faster than Kentucky bluegrass. And he cites himself in 2021. The optimum seeding time for fine fescue mixtures is in the late summer or early autumn months of August and September in cool season climate zones in the United States, with a wider seeding window in the Mediterranean climate. Okay. So there he goes. He tells you the ideal time to seed. It's not in this paper. He cited another paper, but that's the ideal time to seed. Fine fescues may show minimal to no response to the application of phosphorus at seeding, especially on high-quality topsoil. And he has another citation. And I'm sorry, Ross, just bear with me. It's my OCD here. We don't normally allow citations in the conclusions. It's very rare that because this should be in the introduction. This should be in the literature review and the introduction, and the conclusions are reserved for what you found within this paper. But nevertheless, I highlighted it because it's important information. And he's saying that fine fescues show minimal to no response from the application of phosphorus, okay? Especially when the topsoil is a good quality topsoil. Applications of N during the first 8 weeks after planting fine fescue seed should range from a ½ pound to 1 pound in soils with high organic matter, and N fertilizer levels greater than 1 pound during the first 8 weeks after planting may become more detrimental than beneficial in the long term. Okay, last sentence, and then I'm going to come back and sum this all up. Lastly, in conclusion of clover with the Lastly, inclusion of clover with fine fescue may slow the rate of establishment, but does not reduce the final establishment of strong creeping red fescue, slender red fescue, Overall, results indicate it may be beneficial to provide more nitrogen fertilization, 0.5 pound to 1 pound, during the first 8 weeks of establishment to promote a faster grow-in of fine fescue, taxa, or low-input sites, and then nitrogen fertilizer levels can be reduced to a low fertility program, 0.5 pound to 2 pounds per year in the long term. Okay, so I really like this language. I kind of just wish he would have put it in the literature review, but nevertheless, the point is the point of this paper is that they apply to if you're going to apply fine fescues under similar conditions as what they applied here, and you're going to apply nitrogen in there. If hastening the rate of establishment is important to you, then applying more than 1 pound at seeding is not going to help. So what will help you as a businessman or woman is to take that advice, go back to your shop. Let me put me back on here. Take that advice, go back to your shop, and eliminate or reduce the nitrogen that you're applying under similar conditions to the 1 pound max. And I would argue even a 0.5 pound. But the 1 pound max during establishment is more than enough. You don't need to apply anymore. Save that money. Okay? Now, he summed up some literature at the end saying that after that 1 pound is applied at seeding, you can then, for these low input grasses, proceed to follow a normal nitrogen management program of a 0.5 pound to 2 pounds annually. Okay. So I would say this is for these locations. Be aware, this is fine fescue for these locations. All right. You might find the nitrogen rates to vary based upon where you're growing the grass, but more than 2 pounds in his setting, which was in Indiana and Wisconsin and Oregon or Washington, wherever it was, or I guess it was Oregon, is apparently the maximum that they recommend. I don't know if that's true, but the maximum they're going to recommend is 2 pounds a year for these low input grasses. Okay. So that's the summation of this paper. 0.5 pound to 1 pound during establishment. Don't need to apply more. The clover didn't really help much. It probably wasn't worth the input. There was very little benefit to including the clover. There was a detrimental effect to applying more nitrogen due to the increased presence of poa annua or annual bluegrass. Okay. Okay, let's go back and see if I missed anything in the chat. Oh, I see Aldo made it. Good, thank you. Welcome, Aldo. Sorry you were a little bit late, but better late than never. So Eric Sands, I am not paying anything for these paper breakdowns, getting information I can use, and how I might be able to spend less on inputs. I guess that's good. I don't know. I just appreciate you guys showing up and participating in the chat. I started this a couple of weeks ago or whatever it was, and I told my wife, I was like, I think I'm going to get online and start, helping people out a little bit, because there's a gap between science and applied knowledge, and you guys using the applied knowledge are out making money and doing your businesses and paying your bills and hiring employees and paying taxes and all these things, and you don't have time to sit here and goof around with all this literature stuff, but you need to know the information. And scientists, no offense, I was one of them. I still am one of them. Okay. But there's nowhere, I can tell you this with a great deal of certainty, there is nowhere on a tenure and promotion packet that says, how many YouTube videos did you put out explaining to the average person how your information can be used? That doesn't exist. So scientists aren't going to gain anything from spending the time doing this. And I get it. I was in their shoes too. You're busy with grad students and grants and committees and all this other stuff, So in the middle somewhere, I think, is where I'm trying to figure out a little void for me to help people out. So hopefully it's helping. Wrapping this thing up. So tomorrow, we had 9 or 10 people here today. My wife is gone tomorrow too. So I can do this tomorrow night rather than tomorrow morning if you want to do it in the morning. I don't know if is it better for you guys? I don't know how to get a response from you all if you're still here or not, but if it's better for you all in the evening, I'll try to do it tomorrow evening. If you'd rather do it in the morning, I mean, I guess you can say so in chat and I'll try to do it in the morning rather than the evening, but I can't always do it in the evening, but I can today and tomorrow. So I'll give it some thought. Send me an email or send me a text or whatever and let me know. Otherwise, I don't know if it's going to be in the morning or the evening, but I will do another one tomorrow. And tomorrow's let me see if I can find tomorrow's article is awesome. It is going to be I must save that one for Monday because that one's too that one's really super important. I don't want to go over it. Oh yeah, tomorrow's oh yeah, you know what? Good call, Aldo. I don't know if it's Aldo or Aldo. I apologize. Good call on that. I don't want to. The Grass Factor guys are doing their thing tomorrow, and I'm all for that. So I won't interrupt them or try to compete with them. They're not worried about me. I don't have anywhere near their viewers, but I'll let them do their thing and I'll do it in the morning. Okay. So, and then I'll see what I can do about maybe doing another one next week. But tomorrow morning, I'll do another one so I'll do it at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. And I'm going to do a quick one tomorrow. It's a quick, short one, and it's date of seeding effects establishment on cool season turf grasses by, this one is by Zach Riker and Clark Throssell. And it's a short one. It's going to be in and out. It'll be 30, 40 minutes, I promise. It's a very, very short paper, but it talks about the date of seeding and how it affects establishment of cool season turf grasses. So whether you seed it in September, October, November, December, and how that all the way through to May, what month do you seed it? How does that affect the establishment of those grasses? So that's what we'll talk about tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So anyway, I really appreciate everybody showing up. Thank you for all the comments. Thank you for participating. It really, really does mean a lot to me that you guys are using this information. That's really what motivates me to do it, is knowing that somebody out there finds this information useful and hopefully you use it. And if there's anything that's confusing or you want more detail on, please by all means let me know. I make mistakes like everybody makes mistakes, so I'll do my best to answer what I can, and we'll see where this thing leads us to. Okay, keep looking for the answer. How do we know what we know about turfgrass science? And I haven't found it yet, but I'm still searching for that answer. How do we know what we know? Appreciate everybody showing up. All right, see you guys tomorrow morning. Ciao.